this button here, and then somebody comes and brings you what you want. I mean, what more would you like?
How long are you going to stay there?
2 weeks.
2 weeks in the hospital?
Not 3. No, it's not really. It is a hospital, but it's also a rehab center. So it's 3 weeks in the rehab center. This is why I'm dressed, you see? So it's not like a hospital with the gown and everything. I left this afternoon. They went very quick. First, they thought I had to stay there for 7 days, but then she said the wound looks good. So 2 o'clock, somebody comes to get you and brings you to Sierre, which that's where I am now.
Great.
Yeah, I'm quite happy. I'm quite happy that now it seems, now you can do things so that you get well again and you can walk and function properly.
Geshe, yeah.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Venerable Lobsang. You're sick? You're in hospital?
I'm in hospital, yeah. No, I had my second knee replacement.
Okay. How did that go?
Well, it's painful, but I think it went okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, Geshe. Hi, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining our class. Thank you, Geshe, for teaching us. I apologize, but I have a problem with my picture, so I don't have the Buddha and the prayer. I will have it for later. So if you can share the picture or the prayer, so sorry. Still problem with the new computer.
Do you want to just let me share the screen so I'll check whether I've got it here with me?
If not, you can send it to me. Maybe I will succeed because it's crushed everything I had.
Okay. Okay. So you just need it again. Wait, where do I have it? Just a sec. I'll resend it. I don't find it right now. I changed something. Yeah, I deleted
it in the chat. Put it in the chat.
Succeeded.
Yeah. Okay. If you could just enable me to.
It's okay. It's okay. I succeed now.
Okay. Great. Okay. So we'll start as usual with some breathing meditation. And then to feel inspired and to take refuge effectively, let's visualize in the space in front of us our Lama appears in the form of Buddha Shakyamuni as an embodiment of all enlightened beings and all enlightened qualities. With a body made of golden light, wearing the saffron robes of a monk. He's seated in the full lotus posture. And his right hand is in the earth-touching gesture, signifying his great control and having eliminated all hindrances and negativities. His left hand is resting in his lap in the meditation posture or meditation gesture. Indicating that he realizes all phenomena. And in his left hand, he holds a begging bowl. And also visualize that you're surrounded by all sentient beings, seated all around you, wherever there's some space. In your room, in your house, in the area where you live. Sentient beings appear as humans. Quietly seated wherever there's space. All of them, just like us, wanting to be peaceful and satisfied, and not wishing to have any kind of problem, any kind of difficulty. And despite all their shortcomings, all of them having Buddha nature, that is, from the point of view of its actual nature, there's no difference of their minds than the mind of a Buddha. And so let's first generate a sincere sense of affectionate love. Sincerely caring for them, for each and every one of them. Their well-being being just as important as my own. Generate a feeling of care and closeness and affection. All of them being potential friends. And that's then generate great compassion, focusing in particular on the endless sufferings sentient beings experience. Generate the wish, the aspiration for all sentient beings to be completely free from any unwanted experience and its cause. And in particular, generate the aspiration. May I be able to lead sentient beings to a state free from all suffering and its causes. And that aspiration then grows stronger and turns into a deep determination in the form of the altruistic attitude that is determined to do whatever is necessary to help sentient beings to free themselves from the obstructions to liberation, and even from the obstruction to enlightenment. We can remove their suffering and all other hindrances. To be able to effectively do so, let's then generate bodhicitta, a heartfelt aspiration to become completely enlightened, the welfare of each and every sentient being. I think that it's also with that motivation that we'll continue to study Nagarjuna's text. And then while holding the visualization and mind of enlightenment, let's recite the prayer. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits, of practicing generosity, and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits, of practicing generosity, and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits, of practicing generosity, and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Right. Okay, and let's start with the long room. Dalit, can you enable me to share?
I make you co-host.
Oh,
You as
it
co-host.
says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Why? I make you host. Try again with host and not co-host.
Still saying host disabled participant screen sharing.
I think you made Lozang co-host.
Sorry.
Okay, I'll try again.
No, just a moment. It's making me a problem.
Maybe just continue trying and I'll talk about the Lamrim,
Yeah,
right?
sorry.
I'll do that. No, that's okay. Okay. Try one more time.
No, Dalit, Rafael is right. You made me the host.
Yeah, I can see it. I just cannot remove it.
Okay, let me try to remove it then. Doesn't. I only have my tablet. This is the problem. Okay, I'll keep trying and maybe Geshe, if you want to.
I'll start. Okay, great.
If you want to start.
Yeah. Okay, so what you don't see right now, but you probably know the outlines anyway. We talked about death last time, so I guess we are done with death. And then the next topic from the Lamrim, at least according to the outlines I'm following here put together by Venerable Thupten Chodron, considering the quality of life and the two possible kinds of future rebirth, which, well, the two kinds of rebirth are in the lower realm and the higher realm. And here in particular, it's the lower realms. Now, that is not necessarily a favorite topic we like to reflect on. Death and impermanence, no one's got a hard time with that. And
Now
usually,
it's okay, sorry. Now
okay.
It's okay.
Thank you. Okay, great. Just a sec. Oh, there we go. Great. Okay, so the Lamrim. There we go. Okay. Can you see the Lamrim outlines considering the quality of life and the two?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. So thinking of the suffering of the different life forms, experiencing, it says first, continuous pain and fear. Now these 3 points, so this was the first point I just read, and then the second and third, they refer to the possible rebirth in one of the lower realms. First, the hell realm, the hellish kind of realm. The second is the preta realm, and the third is the animal realm. And yeah, well, obviously we have a hard time thinking that this form of existence is possible. Rebirth, anyway, is a difficult topic, and then this kind of existence. Well, I guess especially when we have a hard time doing this, well, it would be a good opportunity to ask ourselves why. Why do I have such a hard time with that? Why do I find it difficult? Well, past and future lives. And on top of that, the possibility of existing in a hellish kind of realm, as it's called, or a preta kind of realm. So this is a good opportunity. Does it have to do with, I merely believe what modern science tells me, and they don't talk about these realms, or whatever other reasons I've got? Maybe they remind me too much of the explanation of the hell realm in other religions, such as Christianity. And of course, then we need to be aware that it's quite different. The explanation is quite different, in particular from the point of view of this is just a temporary state, but still, it's a terrible type of existence. Anyway, if we then still have a hard time thinking of these possible rebirth, well, we can think of hellish states on earth. As a human being, their existences, they can be compared to the pain and the suffering of what's called the hell realm. So if you've got the Lamrim, if you've got a translation of the Lamrim, which I guess most of you have, to read through the descriptions, at least of the hell realms, and then find equally terrible states on the human plane, and to think, well, I'm not born in such an existence, and if there's rebirth, well, I might be reborn in such an existence. So it's important to give whatever I can to avoid that, for that not to happen once I've become aware of my own death. And then the same applies to the Preta existence. The Preta existence being characterized by extreme greed and by this desire for food, drink, and other things, and never being able to really satisfy that desire. The hellish existence is characterized by this incredible physical and mental pain. And then the animal realm, well, don't need to say much about that. It's characterized by, again, of course, the suffering of cold, hunger, being eaten by other animals, and so forth. So to really give it some time to think about this. And if we come across this resistance, well, to face it in that, gives us the opportunity to check where that comes from. But something else I want to say in this context, I got a message from Tao Seti, and he mentions, it is not a question, it's more a statement, and I totally agree with him. He talks about the motivating factor of fear and the motivating factor of joy as part of Dharma practice. Now, there are certain topics in the Lamrim where the motivating factor of fear is emphasized. So meditation on death, meditation on the lower realms, meditation on taking refuge, which we'll talk about later on, versus joy. But I think it's really important to understand, and I totally agree with what Tao Seti says, the importance of joy. Now, joy needs to also be explained. It refers to an inner sense of satisfaction, an inner sense of peace, joy and delight, an inner joy and delight. And that is a very powerful motivating force for practicing the Dharma. In an obvious way, the more joy you feel practicing the Dharma, applying the different Buddhist methods, the stronger you feel motivated to continue on and maybe expand your practice or deepen your practice. But fear is also a part of it. That needs to be explained. Fear, for instance, when we talk about death, it's not about a persistent state of fear. We're not trying to be persistently scared of death. And then the more we meditate, the stronger our fear gets. It's the opposite. It's more about facing our own fear of death in order to overcome it. So really, fear should only be a motivating force in the beginning when we deal with death. Until, like I said, we overcome this fear and become more and more accepting of our own death to such a degree in the end, especially for advanced practitioners. So there's like a huge scale from fear of death all the way to actually looking forward to our own death. For an advanced practitioner who can utilize their own death for very meaningful Dharma practice, well, they look forward to it. It's not like they commit suicide to, get there sooner. No, but they have no fear. And in fact, it's like they enjoy their own death. To cite the name of a title of a book on death that was, I think, edited by Rabina Curtin, or actually published by Rabina Curtin. So enjoy your own death, based on Lama Zopa Rinpoche's instruction. So this is really the goal, to not be scared, but instead to be accepting and even looking forward to it. And then the same applies to the lower realms, for instance. There's an initial fear. When we become aware, well, right now I'm fine. Things are looking good. But what does the future hold? And am I preparing myself for something equally great? I mean, having a precious rebirth right now. Am I preparing myself for something equal or even better? Or am I careless and accumulating the causes to be reborn in the state where I have a lot less opportunities? And when we realize, well, I'm not really preparing myself in an effective, in a positive way, there's fear. That's the first reaction. But then that leads me to make changes. It can be compared to if you spend your whole childhood and adulthood eating foods that potentially could, well, cause a stroke or a heart attack. Well, when you realize that, there's fear. First, there's fear. The realization, oh, I've not eaten the right kind of, not eaten healthy enough, and anything could happen. And that fear then motivates us to eat differently until we overcome that fear, because now we're on the right path. So it can be compared with that. And I totally agree with Tao City. The sense of joy is so important, because that's what keeps us going. So this fear is not a crippling kind of persistent fear, as I said. It's rather motivating us to then find the joy in our Dharma practice. Yeah, so I'm glad that he stressed that again. And I just wanted to, yeah, especially with these topics we're studying right now, where fear may be the first or most obvious motivator, but it actually isn't. It's only in the very beginning. Okay, great. Now, hopefully it's clear what I just explained about the Lamrim. Anyway, if you read the Lamrim, you'll find very extensive explanations. The next part is, well, some of the questions you asked last time and also be asked this time. Well, I'm going to go through it this time. For that, I prepared a handout, but we're not going to go through it in class. We don't have time, but I'll introduce it to you. Let me just open it. It's a handout, an ancillary kind of handout that talks about what kind of mind is mistaken, what kind of mind is non-mistaken, correct, wrong, consciousness, especially since those seem very contradictory. So mistaken and correct, it's mistaken and it's correct. I talked about it last time. The terminology is just applied in a particular way, so that actually mistaken and correct, mistaken mind, correct mind are not contradictory. And so if you, okay, this is too large. Let me just, I don't know, can you see this? No, this is even smaller.
Yeah, this is great. Yeah.
Okay, you can see everything? Okay, great. Then let me just, okay. So here you see a yogic direct perceiver, a mind that realizes emptiness directly. So these are just examples as to their objects, but that mind is non-mistaken and it's correct. This is the only example mentioned here. And that's an ultimate consciousness. The term ultimate consciousness is not used in Tibetan as such, but you have ultimate valid cognizer. And even though it's not one of the terms you find so much in the text, but it can be used, like when you talk about a conventional mind and a conventional consciousness, that term is used as opposed to ultimate. So sometimes the ultimate valid cognizer is used more, but actually ultimate consciousness is not incorrect to use it. But I haven't added the Tibetan here. Anyway, it's not necessary because of the nature of this handout. But yeah, so ultimate consciousnesses, it describes them roughly. And then you have these three types described. And then you've got conventional consciousnesses. Again, three types here described, three divisions. Conventional valid cognizers. And in here, you can see in what way is it mistaken, in what way is it correct. And then you have correct conventional consciousnesses that don't realize their object. Previously, you had valid cognizers that do realize their objects. Then they perceive their objects but don't realize them. So those are the second category of correct conventional consciousnesses. And then you have wrong conventional consciousnesses. Those that don't realize their objects, obviously, their objects don't exist, therefore they can't be realized. And then again, being both mistaken and wrong, and why that is so. Hopefully it's helpful. Like I said, I'm not going to go through it in class. A friend of mine, Tia, she also suggested, and I think it's a very good idea, to put the date up here for every handout so that later on you always know what it's part of or what class it belonged to. I didn't do that so far. And one problem with that is that sometimes I give you a handout, which today, for instance, well, I the lead sent you this handout, substantial cause and cooperative condition, which I may actually not cover today. And then the date changes again. Yeah, so anyway, you've probably looked at it. Okay, now this brings me to questions. We covered those questions last time. And then I'd like to answer this question from Jimmy. Oh, actually, there's B's question first, but I answered a lot of questions from B last time. So once I'm done with Jimmy's question, it'll be B's question. Also, David Gorin sent me a message. I'll mention that when I'm done with these questions. I just try to go in order, whatever I get first. So I go through that first. Tao Seti also made a suggestion. He said I should take my time, not to go through this stuff too quickly, and he's totally right. So I try to slow down a little bit. I just get carried away sometimes. But to get to Jimmy's question. Okay, so Jimmy says, inherent existence, may I object to the frequent use of this word? It's such a meaningless word in our common everyday English. Yeah, it's not used that much. Every time I hear it, I have to mentally retranslate it to mean objective existent, unimputed existent, non-subjective existence. That way it gets some more meaning. Actually, I got that message last time and I tried to mention objective existence more. But if anyone has a problem with this word, okay, an alternative would be intrinsically existent. Or as Jay Garfield says, and he uses the same, well, in Tibetan it's the same word, so that's sometimes translated as inherently existent, as intrinsically existent, or as Jay Garfield puts it, as essentially existent. Mean the same thing. Okay, inherent, intrinsically. Now, that term is still really important because it focuses more on the object, that the object is not in and of itself, from its own side, does not exist as a self, as a body, and so forth. There's nothing found within the object. Objective existence, literally in Tibetan, it means it doesn't exist from the side of the object, which is quite similar to inherent existence. Whereas the English word objective existence moves us more, or the lack of an objective existence seems to be moving us more towards the mind, which is also fine. So anyway, so subjective existence versus objective existence. Whereas in Tibetan, it really means from the side of the object. But of course, by implication, therefore, there's nothing found from the side of the object that makes it this, that, and the other. It's independence on many different factors, that it is a vas, that it is a self, and so forth. Anyway, I think it's good to use all these words. And when we come across a term that we have a hard time with, especially focus in on that. This is also quite important when it comes to Dharma practice. Of course, there's certain aspects we may not want to learn about right now. We may not want to practice right now, certain words we don't prefer, but sooner or later we should spend some time with them in a very gentle way and ask ourselves, why, how come? How come I have a hard time with this word? And maybe look up its definition. So in this case here, what does it mean? Is this really the meaning of what Nagarjuna is that what Nagarjuna is refuting here? Okay, anyway, so he goes on to say, my reasoning is as follows. Aren't we talking about subjective mental imputations here? That every moment, all that happens is another act of imputation by a subjective mind. Okay, now, are we talking about subjective mental imputation? Yes, we are. Every moment is another act of imputation by a subjective mind. Not every moment. You need to have a conceptual mind that is labeling. So there may be moments when that is not there. I mean, conceptual mind, yeah, when you're dreaming, for instance, and there's a direct mental perceiver that is dreaming. But okay, we can say most of the time there is a conceptual mind, and therefore there's this act of labeling, of just having these thoughts. It's this and not that. Okay. Isn't it more meaningful to emphasize that subjectiveness and action as opposed to objectiveness or objective passive perception? Well, in a way it is, but Nagarjuna keeps using the word Rashingitoba. Nagarjuna uses that most of the time. He keeps saying inherent existence, or if you want to call it intrinsic existence or essential existence. He doesn't use the term objective or existing from the side of the object as much, which is why I do the same. So certain texts use certain words more frequently. Some texts use the word true existence, that phenomena don't exist truly. And here in this case, it's inherent existence. That's why I opted to do the same. However, I agree with you, it should be mentioned every now and then. And so I try and adjust that. Okay, as I understand it, there's no such thing as objective passive perception, yes. Aren't all imputations active? They're a mental activity, yes, I agree. And then that's the problem now. Would that also answer B's second question? Which one comes first, the chicken or the egg? If you remember, what comes first, the labeling mind or the object? And he says, don't they come both together? That's a problem. On the basis and the label, on the basis and the label only meaningful together? Isn't the perception, isn't the sense perception and the mental imputation meaningful only together? Well, first of all, when we label something, let's say you label a vase on the basis of the parts of the vase. Now, the labeling mind is the conceptual mind thinking vase. But before you label vase, these parts of the vase have to appear. These parts of the vase appear to you, and then there's the thought vase. Without these parts appearing, how can you then label on the basis of imputation? How can you then label vase? So you have the basis of imputation, and you have the object to be labeled. You have the phenomenon that is being labeled. And in general, we can say first you perceive the parts of the vase, and then you label vase. If that has to happen simultaneous, and this is a very common perception that we have when we learn about imputation and the object existing on the basis of designating an object, we have a sense, unless you label, the object cannot exist in that moment. The problem you have is then, let's say, for instance, you're in a room and everyone is looking at the room and thinking of the room. You've got 3 people in that room, and then everyone leaves the room and no one is left in the room. Let's assume there's no living being, no insect, nothing left in that room. It's totally empty of, well, it's a little hard to imagine that, because of course there may be existences from other realms, but even let's just assume it's totally empty. So there's no, in that room, there's no labeling consciousness. Does that mean the room disappear? Do you have to label in that moment? No, you don't. It's not necessary in that moment. And another example is, for instance, the first Dalai Lama, he was not called the Dalai Lama at that time. That came later. He was only called the Dalai Lama later, but retrospectively, so later on, the first person that they recognized to be the Dalai Lama, he was then later on called the first Dalai Lama. But while he was alive, while Gyalwa Genendrup was alive, or Genendrup was alive, the Dalai Lama Gyalwa Genendrup was alive, he was not called Dalai Lama. No one labeled him that. So was he the Dalai Lama or not? Well, yeah, he was. He was the first Dalai Lama. But at that time, no one labeled him such. So you can have labeling much later. You can label actually before something comes into existence, and simultaneous. So therefore, the question is always what comes first. The question does arise still, I would say. Okay. Anyway, this is quite extensive now, what I've said, and I want to go back to the text. So I'll go through the rest of it later on, and I hope it'll be explained also, it becomes clear as we go along. But the way I understand this question is very much mind only again. The object and the mind exist at the same time. And that is definitely not the case, especially with the sense consciousness. You have the object first, and then the mind that perceives it. And with the labeling mind, as I said, first you need to perceive the basis of imputation in order then to be able to label this, that, and the other, was, I, and so forth. So we can say in general, yes, there's the basis first, and then you label. And we have to find a middle way between feeling like this has to happen simultaneously or it doesn't happen at all. And we learn this basically as part of the first chapter as well. You'll see how the time is always an important issue, that something doesn't have to happen at the same time and still be possible. But you'll see as we go through the verses. All right. So that should be enough for the questions today. Oh, Jimmy also very nicely did a glossary, put together a glossary with the Tibetan term, with the Sanskrit term, in some cases, I guess in most cases. But there are 2 or 3 things I'd like to change. So Jimmy, if you could send a Word file to Dalit, then I'll make some suggestions. Send it back to you and also make it available to everyone else. And then as we go along, if Jimmy could add some words, that's definitely helpful. Okay, anyway, that's that for the questions. Okay, next is fundamental wisdom. I call it introduction now because, well, eventually the first chapter, I'll start a new file. I talked about it last time. Okay, so let's go back to the actual material. Now, we got to explaining conventional existence versus conventional truth and ultimate truth. And as part of understanding what conventional existence means, well, we went through what we mentioned, at least the 3 criteria, that something is known to a conventional consciousness. You may remember last time, my take on that is that, and well, hopefully I'm not the only one, but according to what I understand from the explanations of my teachers, that really anything, whether existent or not, fulfills the first criterion, satisfies the first criterion, that it's known to a conventional consciousness. In that way, it's just implying that anything can be taken, or it's indicating that anything can be taken to mind. And there are some who would argue that only that which is known, that which is generally, or here, some would say that only that which is commonly known or commonly accepted satisfies the first criterion. But then the problem would be that things that are usually cognized only by a single person, I mean, that's not commonly accepted. What I perceive right now that no one else perceives, I mean, I see something that none of you see, and of course this is also true for you. We can't say that that is commonly accepted, but it still has to satisfy the first criterion because it exists, conventionally exists. Anyway, so first criterion talks about anything that exists, existent, non-existent, anything that is commonly accepted, whether it's possible or not, that is part of the first criterion. But now we need to narrow it down further, because if anything satisfies the first criterion, well, we like to narrow it down to phenomena that only exist, which is why the second and third criteria are needed, because they preclude anything that is non-existent. They eliminate anything that is non-existent. Did I give you the right version of the text? Hopefully I did. Okay. Second criterion. The second criterion for a phenomenon to be conventionally existent is that it's not contradicted or negated by a conventional valid cognizer. Okay, so it's not contradicted or negated. Yes. Conventional truth, such as living beings, consciousnesses, bodies, trees, and so forth, they're not contradicted by a conventional valid cognizer. Why? Because there are no conventional minds that realize the non-existence of these objects. Now, to be contradicted by a conventional valid cognizer. A conventional valid cognizer, just to remind you, is basically a mind that realizes its object, and its main object is a conventional truth. Wait, I need to see some of your faces to know that you understand. Okay, all right. So, a conventional valid cognizer is a mind that knows its object, and its object is a conventional truth. Okay, so being known by a conventional valid cognizer is different to being contradicted by it. To be contradicted by a conventional valid cognizer really means that the mind, that valid cognizer, realizes the non-existence of that object. It realizes the non-existence of, well, let's take something like the horns of a rabbit. The horns of a rabbit, well, it will come to that. Anyway, sorry, before I start reading this, before I explain it, let's go through it. So conventional truths such as living beings, consciousnesses, bodies, trees, and so forth, they're not contradicted by a conventional valid cognizer because there are no conventional minds that realize the non-existence of these objects. Okay. There are just no conventional minds that realize that these objects exist. It cannot be known that these objects don't exist because living beings exist, consciousnesses exist. So therefore, these conventional minds do not contradict, do not negate living beings, consciousnesses, etc. Simply because they exist, and therefore their non-existence cannot be known or realized. Okay. So that is the category of conventional truth. Of everything that exists, so if we do this in a very kind of systematic way, anything that exists is either a conventional truth or an ultimate truth. Now, obviously, conventional valid cognizers can only deal with conventional truth. They cannot, well, I mean, they can, of course, think of emptiness, like I mentioned it in the explanation of the first criterion. Of course, without engaging in ultimate analysis, you can think of emptiness. Someone explains it to you, but the mind is not effective enough to actually realize the non-existence of inherent existence. So it cannot contradict inherent existence, for instance. So really the sphere, the domain of objects, or the sphere of objects of a conventional mind are conventional truth. And of course, it can contradict objects, the non-existence of which is a conventional truth. Okay, so to give you an example, like horns of a rabbit, if you see a rabbit from afar and its ears look like horns, and you mistakenly perceive these ears to be horns, well, these horns don't exist. They're not a conventional truth. But the non-existence of these horns, they exist. The non-existence of the horns exist. And they're a conventional truth. They're not emptiness. They're not an ultimate truth. They're a conventional truth. And therefore, the horns of a rabbit, they can be contradicted. They are negated by this conventional valid cognizer. So additionally, and of course, as we just heard, conventional truth, that which does exist, conventional truth, they are not contradicted by conventional valid cognizers because their non-existence can't be known. But not only do conventional valid cognizers not contradict conventional truth, they also do not contradict ultimate truth, such as the emptiness of a living being, the emptiness of a consciousness, and so on. The reason is the same as before. There are no conventional cognizers that realize the non-existence of this ultimate truth, which that's the meaning of contradicting. Contradicting something means to know that it doesn't exist, to understand that it doesn't exist. But the ultimate truth exists, so there's no mind, and certainly not a conventional valid cognizer, because its object, it can't really effectively deal with or apprehend ultimate truth. Okay, so therefore, what does it say so far? A conventional valid cognizer neither contradicts conventional truth nor ultimate truth. So what does it contradict? Well, something that doesn't exist. By contrast, something that doesn't exist, the non-existence of which is a conventional truth, such as the horns of a rabbit, something easily understood, or a permanent situation. Doesn't exist. Okay? A permanent situation. I mean, we may talk about, oh, the situation is permanently difficult or what have you, but a situation, by definition, permanent means unchanging. And we have a sense that the situation is always the same. So we're always getting in the same situation. It's always the same problem. If we believe, for instance, the situation I'm experiencing today is the same as yesterday, I'm believing in a permanent situation, because the situation yesterday and today, they're the same. And if they're the same, they haven't changed. Those two situations haven't changed. Now we have this instinctive sense, relationships, situations, myself, that I don't change, and so forth. That's impossible. So it is contradicted by conventional valid cognizer, because there are conventional minds realizing that a rabbit doesn't have horns, although its ears may appear as horns from a distance, and that the situation cannot be permanent because it changes moment by moment. Okay. There's this, what does it say? Although the horns of a rabbit don't exist, oh, here, the non-existence of the horns of a rabbit does exist. The non-existence of the horns of a rabbit can be known. It is an object of knowledge and thus exists. This is a little bit unusual for us. Our mind, and this is also part of our misapprehension of reality, always adds to things. It's affirmative. It perceives things to exist in and of themselves, very concrete. It always adds something to their way of existence. And we have an instinctive, we have a sense that the non-existence of something can't be known. It feels uncomfortable to just refute something because we always add to things. We don't really negate. But of course, the non-existence of the horns of a rabbit does exist. I mean, the non-existence of a stone right here where I move my hand, or the non-existence, I don't know, of a tree trunk is very important for me right now, because otherwise I couldn't, I mean, important in the sense is possible. The non-existence of a tree trunk in that space where I move my hand is existent, because otherwise I couldn't move my hand. So the non-existence of a tree trunk between myself and the computer screen definitely exists. It can be known. It's an existent phenomenon. Likewise, the non-existence of the horns of a rabbit exists as an object of knowledge. But this non-existence is not an ultimate truth, but a conventional truth. Okay, so it can be contradicted by a conventional mind. The horns of a rabbit can be contradicted by a conventional mind because the non-existence of them is a conventional truth. The same is true for anything else that does not exist, the non-existence of which is not an ultimate truth. For instance, a permanent situation. Its non-existence is a conventional truth. The non-existence of a permanent situation, well, a permanent situation doesn't exist, so its non-existence exists because there are only impermanent situations. It sounds a little complicated. I'm not sure how much you can follow me. It sounds a little contradictory, maybe, but it's just a matter of getting used to thinking of non-existences as existing. Not all non-existences exist. The non-existence of of yourself doesn't exist, because you do exist, right? Either your existence exists or your non-existence exists. But since the I exists, we say the non-existence of the I doesn't exist. The existence of the I exists. But when we talk about the inherently existent I, its non-existent exists, its existence doesn't. Okay. So again, it sounds very confusing. This is in a debate situation, you may actually challenge the other person, and especially in the beginning, you play a lot around with the words and try to confuse the other person by throwing in a few non-existence of non-existence and existence, and you just train yourself in getting used to these weird words, right? Non-existence of non-existence and so forth. I mean, weird words in the sense that we don't talk like that on a daily basis. Anyway, okay, but returning to this. So certain things, the non-existence of which are conventional truth, they are contradicted by conventional valid cognizers. However, not everything that is non-existent is contradicted by a conventional valid cognizer. An example is the inherent existence of the self, or of anything else that exists, because the non-existence or lack of inherent, an example is the inherent existence of the self or of anything else that exists. So the inherent existence of anything else that exists, because the non-existence or lack of inherent existence of a phenomenon is not realized by a conventional mind. In general, emptiness does not fall within the cognitive domain of a conventional mind. It falls within the cognitive domain of an ultimate consciousness. So therefore, in order to exclude inherent existence from the category of conventional existence, a third criterion is required. So just saying being negated by a conventional valid cognizer is not sufficient, because then inherent existence, it satisfies the first criterion, it satisfies the second criterion. A conventional valid cognizer cannot contradict inherent existence. It's just not, it's not, it doesn't fall within the category, it doesn't fall within the cognitive domain. It's not the sphere of object of a conventional mind. Therefore, if we didn't have the third category, if we didn't have the third criterion, inherent existence would be conventionally existent. But of course, we know that's not the case. Okay, so with this here, I just try to summarize what I just said. Once again, what is not contradicted, conventional truth are not contradicted, and ultimate truth are not contradicted by conventional valid cognizers. So therefore, they satisfy the second criterion. They're not contradicted by conventional valid cognizers. Inherent existence also satisfies the second criterion, the first and the second, but not the third. So inherent existence is out, because in order to exist, you have to satisfy all three. Only something that doesn't exist, the non-existence of which is a conventional truth, is contradicted by conventional valid cognizers. Okay. So we need the third criterion. The third criterion for a phenomenon to be conventionally existent is that it is not contradicted or invalidated by correct analysis of suchness. That's how it's usually formulated. But it's also possible to say, since such ultimate analysis gives rise to an ultimate valid cognizer, the third criterion can also be formulated to stipulate that a phenomenon is not contradicted or negated by an ultimate valid cognizer. So in other words, the third criterion, as is usually in the Lamrim Chemu, for instance, in the Great Lamrim, or in the Great Treatise of the stages on the path on the stage of the path to enlightenment, there the third criterion is quoted, or is formulated, saying that a phenomenon is not contradicted or invalidated by correct analysis of suchness. But since previously a conventional valid cognizer was mentioned as part of the second criterion, to be consistent, it's a little easier to then talk about not being contradicted by an ultimate valid cognizer, which is totally correct. And many of my teachers would explain it that way. They move away from this being contradicted by correct analysis of suchness. Why? Because this correct analysis of suchness then leads to an ultimate valid cognizer. So not being negated or not being contradicted by an ultimate valid cognizer, that is the third criterion. Ultimate truth, such as the emptiness of the self, the emptiness of the body, the emptiness of the mind, and so forth, they're not negated by an ultimate valid cognizer since they're realized by such a mind. Okay, so ultimate truth, conventional truth, those cannot be contradicted by an ultimate valid cognizer. Well, because at least ultimate truth, they are understood by such a mind. Also, ultimate valid cognizers do not contradict conventional truth, such as the conventional self, the body, the mind, because there's no mind that realizes the non-existence of these phenomena simply because they exist. So there's no mind that realizes their non-existence. So again, no conventional, no ultimate truth is contradicted by the third criterion. Is contradicted, by an ultimate valid cognizer. But ultimate valid cognizers contradict or negate inherent existence, because in dependence on ultimate analysis, they realize the lack of inherent existence of a phenomenon, which is the same as realizing the non-existence of that phenomenon's inherent existence. Okay, so they are contradicted. Inherent existence is contradicted by an ultimate valid cognizer. However, just as with conventional valid cognizers, ultimate valid cognizers are not able to negate everything that is non-existent. Okay? Conventional valid cognizer are not able to contradict inherent existence, and ultimate valid cognizers, they're not able to negate. They're only able to negate inherent existence. They're unable to contradict the horns of a rabbit or anything else, the non-existence of which is a conventional truth. This is because conventional truth do not fall within the cognitive domain of ultimate truth minds. So this shows again that these two truths, ultimate truth and conventional truth, they both exist. They both exist because they're the domain of different, they fall within the cognitive domain, or they're the objects of different minds. So seen from the perspective of a conventional mind, talk about conventional truth. Seen from the perspective of ultimate mind, we talk about ultimate truth. But there's no contradiction. They're just seen with a different mind. Just as, and I gave the example last time, we can talk about shapes and colors that are perceived by an eye consciousness or by a visual consciousness, a visual sense consciousness. They perceive shapes and colors. They don't perceive sound. But that doesn't mean sound doesn't exist. Just because that particular mind, this eye sense consciousness or visual sense consciousness doesn't perceive sound, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just is not, sound does not fall within the cognitive domain of an eye consciousness. It falls within the cognitive domain of an ear consciousness, right? And then the same goes for shape and color. It still exists, but it does not fall within the cognitive domain of an ear consciousness. Therefore, whether objects exist or not depend on the particular minds that they pertain to, or the objects of which they are. Okay, so they're mainly the objects of certain types of mind, and based on that, we can say they exist or they don't, depending on what these objects are. Anyway, so here we've heard that we need, so the first criterion includes everything, existent or not existent. The second criterion negates everything other than, everything that doesn't exist other than inherent existence. And the third criterion negates or precludes or eliminates anything inherent. It precludes inherent existence. It eliminates inherent existence, but nothing else that doesn't exist other than inherent existence, which shows, therefore, we definitely need the second and the third criteria. So summarized here by this paragraph, therefore, for something to exist conventionally, it has to satisfy all three criteria. If it only had to satisfy the first and second criteria, inherent existence would exist conventionally. If it only had to satisfy the first and third criteria, the horns of a rabbit would exist. So the third criterion precludes inherent existence from existing conventionally, and the second criterion precludes everything else that doesn't exist. Okay, I think I explained it in a really complicated way. It was probably much more straightforward if I hadn't given that much explanation. I didn't mean to confuse you. It sounds a little confusing, especially when we talk about not contradicted. Anyway, it's summarized here again with this little chart. And you can read this at your own time. Okay, all right. So to summarize, therefore, the relationship between conventional existence and the true truth. And remember, I started this section because, well, Lama Tsongkhapa mentions those two concepts, conventional existence on one hand, and then the true truth on the other. He mentions them, and I think it's important to be able to differentiate between them and to summarize whatever exists conventionally, so it's the same as existent. And then you have ultimately existent, which doesn't exist. It's the same as inherently existent and is impossible. So this category, I mention it here, but there's nothing that fits that category. This doesn't exist. Okay. But then you have conventionally existent, same as existent, satisfies the three criteria, and then those two are divided into conventional truth and ultimate truth. All right, that was really quick. There's Toseti telling me not to be so quick, and that was much faster than usual. Yes, I didn't actually want to do that much, but well, it is what it is. I hope it's clear. I hope there are no questions with regard to especially this. Should we start the first chapter? No, the first chapter I'll do next time. So we can actually, next time we'll start the first chapter, the first verse of the first chapter. What should we do now? Well, if there are any questions, anything on what we covered today, please let me know. Oh, please let me know. You could raise your hand. Oops. What did I just do? He says that wasn't her question. Okay, Sneh, go ahead. Oh, so you need to unmute yourself. Oh no, can Dalit, can you unmute? Sneh, ask to unmute. I don't think I can do it. Sneh, can you unmute yourself? Okay, you're unmuted. Sneh, sorry, we can't hear you. I can't hear you.
She is on mute, but I don't know why we cannot hear her.
Okay.
Can you speak louder?
Can you speak? No. Okay. Well, it doesn't matter. Right now we've got, well, do you mind, Sneh, to maybe type it in the meeting chat? Yeah, if you could type it in there. All right. And then B also said, I think that wasn't my question. I think what B was saying is Jimmy talked about as part of his question that he thought that this would also answer B's question. Let me just go back to the questions. Oh, here we got it. Would that also answer B's second question? Which comes first, the chicken or the egg? That actually wasn't B's question. That's right. In order for me, I tried to answer B's question about, let me just go back to her question. If conventionality is established by a conceptual mind through labeling, how does sense consciousness establish anything? So it was, I believe it was in that context that I talked about labeling, of course, the labeling mind establishes the existence of phenomena, but also the sense consciousnesses, they also establish the existence of phenomena. And it was somehow in that context that I said things appear to us, and then based on what appears, we label. But certain phenomena also appear to us because we labeled them first, and then they can appear to our mind, right? You remember that? I gave that explanation, like when you were a young child, when you were like you're just a little, like you're a toddler. Well, we don't remember really, but I think it's safe to assume that when you walk around, you don't perceive things in a three-dimensional way yet. You perceive shapes and colors, and then you start making sense of what you see, and you start, even with your eye consciousness, to be able to see in the three-dimensional way. You see tables and chairs and so forth, which, because of this mental process of labeling, the conceptual process of labeling, that influences your perception. This influences your sense perception. And so it's because of the labeling you see certain things. And then the question arises, well, but before you start to label, you may still see certain things. Is that also because you labeled? And in response to that, we could say, well, yeah, in a previous life. So we don't know what comes first, the labeling or the sense consciousnesses. I think it was in that context that I talked about B's question. But anyway, what Jimmy talked about, it was still an important aspect that he mentioned about the object versus the mind, what comes first. That's also an important issue we need to look at, and the first chapter does that, actually. Okay, now that was B's comment in this meeting chat sections. Okay, and now we've got Snee's question. We only got time, I think, for hers. In your notes, extreme of nihilism is defined as the extreme of deprecation, non-existence of karma, and extreme of fabrication, intrinsic existence. Does the extreme of nihilism also mean that things do not exist at all? Yes, actually it does. So this is just an example. The non-existence of karma is only an example of the extreme of nihilism. Okay, this is described as an extreme of deprecation versus the extreme of fabrication as an extreme of... We haven't really talked about why this is called extreme of deprecation versus the extreme of fabrication. But besides that, to answer your question, the extreme of nihilism also refers to things not existing at all. Now, why is this mentioned in the first place? Why do we talk about these two extremes? Well, because in our effort to understand emptiness, we are bound to fall into one of those two extremes. In general, before we hear about emptiness, we have already naturally fallen into the extreme of reification. We perceive phenomena to exist inherently. If then we learn about emptiness, we may get a sense, and we all know this, oh, then nothing really exists. If phenomena don't exist inherently, how could they exist at all? Now, that doesn't mean we fall into the extreme of nihilism. To fall into the extreme of nihilism means to be convinced and to act on that. Okay? So it's like, do we really? I mean, this is a question in debate as well. Can you fall into the extreme of nihilism that suddenly you believe that nothing exists? No, I don't think so. It's like, you just need to pinch yourself. Does it hurt? Oh, yes. And I still see things around me. So at least if I believe I'm hallucinating, at least my hallucination is there. Okay, even if I don't believe, okay. But it is possible that if a person meditates for long enough and maybe also overdoes it a little bit, and to such a degree they fall into extreme of nihilism, such that they may believe, okay, things around me, yeah, they still appear and that appearance exists, but actions don't have consequences. How could an action I accumulate in this life, if it doesn't exist inherently, how can it be carried over to a different existence? How could something that happens in the morning have a consequence in the evening if there's not an inherent mind that is the connecting link between the two, right? I need something very solid that connects the past action with the future experience that we call the karmic experience. And then I may feel, no, actions don't have consequences, right? Oh, no way, I can do whatever I want. There's no inherent action, there's no inherent mind, there's no inherent experience. Oh, I don't care, I just do whatever I like. That would be a possibility, and that's a danger. But is there more than that? That is part of the term extreme of nihilism? Absolutely. So that there's no I. Okay, so oftentimes when people hear teaching on the Dharma, teaching on emptiness, they say, well, since the self doesn't exist, right? So they start their question, well, as you just explained, the I doesn't exist. I don't think they've fallen into extreme of nihilism, but that's a question that expresses nihilism. To fall into is like to be totally convinced from now on and act upon it. Right? That would be more like falling to. Have we fallen into the extreme of reification? Yes, we act on it. Our whole life is influenced by our sense, I exist inherently, I'm inherently more important than you are, get used to it, right? That's how we act, that's how we feel. Okay, great. That's it for today. Yes, so we've covered quite a lot actually on the 3 criteria. I do tell City I try to slow down more. I hope I wasn't too fast, but anyway, I answered some of, well, at least one question with all its sub questions. Plus, I covered now, or I completed the 3 criteria. For something to exist, which is the same as saying conventionally or nominally existent, it has to satisfy those 3. It must be an object of mind, of consciousness, and it cannot be contradicted by a conventional valid cognizer and a ultimate valid cognizer. All right, and that, in the way I describe, includes conventional truth, ultimate truth, because those 2 truths are the subdivision of anything that exists conventionally, anything that exists. And so, yeah, in that way we can determine what exists, what doesn't, what exists conventionally, what doesn't. Okay, so we're done with the first chapter, therefore. No, with the introduction, and next time we start with the first chapter. Okay, it was long enough. This introduction was long enough, but hopefully it gave you some basis so that what is going to come is a little easier. And some of your questions weren't answered yet. Some of your comments, I didn't mention them, but I will next time. Okay, great. So then let's do a meditation specifically on the 3 criteria. Okay. But before that, we'll do some breathing meditation, mindfulness of the breath. in order to fully understand emptiness, it's important to understand the difference between conventionally existent and ultimately existent. Nothing exists ultimately. Because to exist ultimately, inherently or objectively, mean the same thing. So the only other option would be that phenomena exist conventionally. How can we check whether something exists conventionally or not? Well, we check whether something satisfies the 3 criteria or not. Something that exists conventionally is known to a conventional consciousness. It is not contradicted by a conventional valid cognizer. And it is not contradicted by an ultimate valid cognizer. As criterion just tells us that no matter whether something exists or it doesn't, it can become an object of our mind, an object of our thoughts. Our consciousness can take anything to mind. Even things that are impossible. But since we want to eliminate things that don't exist, from everything that is conventionally existent, we need the second and the third criteria. The second criterion is that something that is conventionally existent is not contradicted or negated by a conventional valid cognizer. Conventional valid cognizer does not contradict conventional truth, and it does not contradict ultimate truth. It doesn't contradict conventional truths such as my body, my mind, cars, cities, mountains, and so on, because the non-existence of these objects cannot be known. As they all exist. But a conventional valid cognizer also doesn't contradict emptiness or the ultimate truth. Because the non-existence of the ultimate truth cannot be known. Inherent existence is not conventionally existent. But it cannot be contradicted by a conventional valid cognizer, since a conventional valid cognizer cannot realize its non-existent. The non-existence of inherent existence does not fall within the cognitive domain of such a conventional mind. So what is it that I can contradict? Well, anything that doesn't exist except inherent existence. The horns of a rabbit, blue snow mountain, permanent situation, they're contradicted by a conventional valid cognizer. Because such a mind realizes their non-existence. And so, since inherent existence is not contradicted by a conventional valid cognizer, we need a third criterion. Not being contradicted by an ultimate valid cognizer. That contradicts inherent existence, for it realizes the non-existence of inherent existence. Yet it doesn't contradict conventional truth nor ultimate truth. So in that way, we get a better sense of what it means to exist conventionally. And so, to conclude this short analysis, spend a few moments just simultaneous, single-pointedly focusing on whatever insight you've gained. Allow yourself to be moved by that insight on an emotional level. And then let's dedicate all the positive potential we accumulated together. Once again, may that become a cause for all of us to eliminate all our misperceptions and their imprints in order to become fully enlightened, and in that way be of greatest benefit to all sentient beings. And may our positive potential become a cause for our great spiritual lamas, our Gurus like His Holiness the Dalai Lama to have an extremely long life, remain healthy and strong, to be able to teach us through their words and also through their examples. And may our virtue also help other beings right here and right now in this world, especially those who are affected by the destruction of the environment. Well, human beings who are affected by extreme climate, by extreme weather phenomena. And of course, so many thousands of animals who perish because of pollution, global warming, and so forth. And of course, not to forget, may also affect those who are sick, like Geshe, Punsok, Tali Lubin, and everyone else who's right now not well. For them to get better soon, for their physical ailments to subside. With that in mind, let's recite the prayers. Through the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chenrezig, Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. Great, thank you. Okay, so have a nice week, and I'll see you again next time. And if you've got more questions, please send them to Dalit. Okay, bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.